It makes me want to literally just start crying right now. So hello, beautiful friends and fellow word lovers. Welcome back to Pocket of Poetry. My name is Olivia. Today's video is going to, of course, be my April wrap-up. I will be talking about all the books I read this past month. This was my best reading month so far in terms of how many books I read. I read 11 books in April. So without further ado, let's jump right into my thoughts on the books I read. Book number one that I read in April was In 5 Years by Rebecca Searle. This book, I initially went into it thinking it was a romance, and I picked it because I thought it was a romance, but it actually turned out to be not quite a romance-centered plot. And so I ended up rating this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I wasn't obsessed with it. I feel like 3.5 is the rating that I give a book when I feel like it was a good book, but I wasn't like obsessed with it or totally in love with it. That's kind of how I felt about this one. It started out, like, the way that the book and the storyline started out, I just really was not crazy about it. Like, it started out seeming like such a stereotypical romance about a girl who's this straight-laced big city lawyer who has her entire life planned down to the T, and she's so over-organized about everything. And then she, her life kind of gets turned upside down by this event where she sees 5 minutes of her life 5 years into the future one night. And she's super confused by these events. Nothing seems to make sense. She wakes up in an apartment with a different guy. She's engaged to this one guy that she's been in a relationship with for years. And so she kind of goes through the next 5 years trying to avoid this scenario that she's afraid of happening. And basically, I feel like one of the main messages of this novel was that life never turns out the way you expect it. You really can't plan your life out to a T. Even though the main character in this book, Dani, had really tried as best she could for a really long time to plan her life down to a T, in the end, things end up going wrong, going differently than she had expected and planned. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but the book really was more about female friendship than it was about romance. And it was about the relationship between Dani and her best friend, and kind of like the complications of their relationship over the years. And I honestly ended up being a really, really sweet story about their friendship that was super touching and definitely made me like tear up a little bit at the end. And overall, the book wasn't necessarily like a super enjoyable read for me, but I do think that it had a lot of valuable messages. I do think that the relationship between Dani and her friend, who I cannot remember the name of right now, was really, really sweet. And yeah, so overall, I'm giving this one a solid 3.5. I think that it was well done. I think that the concept was very interesting, and I do like how she subverted expectations and definitely kept you guessing until the end what was going to happen. The book that I'm going to talk about that I read in April was Middlemarch by George Eliot. I participated in a buddy read on Kiera Foster's channel doing this, and we started reading it in March and finished it in April, and it was so good. This is a book that I've actually kind of been wanting to read for a while because I knew that my mom really liked this book. She read it a long time ago and she really enjoyed it. And like, I don't know, I've been wanting to read more classics like that recently because I love like Jane Austen and those kind of books, and Middlemarch definitely had a similar vibe to like some Jane Austen books that I've read. So I really, really enjoyed this one. I'm actually giving it a 5 out of 5 stars because I just loved it, and I think for the time period that it was written in, it's an exceedingly brilliant book. The characters are so deep. Just the world building that she does in it is incredible. This book is super, super long. I listened to it on audio, and the audiobook was 30 hours. So it's definitely a big one. The audiobook was really, really good. Excellent. Like, if you're going to read Middlemarch and embark on this journey, I would totally recommend listening to it on audio because it was a very good audiobook. So essentially, it's kind of hard to explain what the plot of Middlemarch is because there's so much that goes on in this book. It's a huge plot spanning over a lot of different characters. Basically, we're centered around this small town called Middlemarch, and there's a plot line around the like owner of the parish and his 2 nieces, Dorothea and Celia, and Dorothea ends up being like one of the main characters that we follow throughout the book. And my favorite storyline was definitely Dorothea's. I just loved her. She started out pretty annoying. You start out kind of seeing her as this like overly religious character. She's very zealous. She really wants to do something meaningful with her life. She wants to glorify God with her life, and she wants to just contribute value. And as a woman, she has a really hard time trying to figure out her place in the world and figure out how she can be of service and how she can live a life that has meaning. And so a lot of her storyline is about her trying to find this meaning in her life and going through a lot along the way, like a lot along the way. And then there's other characters whose storylines intertwine with hers, and she had a really intense romance plot. We'll just say that. She had a very intense, her story was a love story, but it was more a story about like her finding herself and just everything that she goes through in order to be in a place in her life where she like is able to find love. So yes, 5 out of 5 stars on Middlemarch. Would recommend reading that one if you like classics. For my friends, you knew it was coming. I'm going to be talking about The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. I just feel like this book came at the perfect time. Like I was reading it like right as spring was beginning to just really feel like spring. I don't know why, but I feel like this book is the best kind of book to read in the spring or the fall, like when the seasons are changing. The thing that I adored about this, okay, so essentially the premise of this book, you have 5 college students, and at the very beginning of the book, this is not a spoiler because this happens at the very beginning, in the prologue, you find out that this group of students has killed one of their friends who was previously a member of their group, named Bunny, and you find out that they have killed him. And so the book is more not a whodunit but more of a whydunit, which I've seen people describe it as that, where that you're kind of going back in time and discovering the story of why they ended up killing him, what brought them to this point. And so I don't know. So the narrator of this book, his name's Richard, and I just really liked the way that the book was narrated. I loved the writing style. I think that is honestly part of the reason that this book is so enchanting. Like the storyline in and of itself is haunting and intriguing and fascinating, but the writing just really pushes it over the top and makes it like a next level reading experience, because I really felt like I was kind of walking around in a dream the entire time I was reading this book. Like it's the type of book that transports you with the writing and makes you feel like you're living in this world, but that the main character Richard describes everything happening is so, the best word that I can really think of to describe it is hazy. Like you feel like you're kind of viewing everything as if you're walking through a dream in a way. And it's interesting because this main character, right, he was involved in a murder, and so he's kind of dissociating. You can kind of tell that even through the narrator, she's exploring the psychological effect that this act and this instance had on him, and like how he kind of is almost unable to fully face what happened and what went on, but he's almost kind of dissociating everything. You get the sense that he's kind of dissociated from everything that's happening. And chapter 1 of this book opens up with the Richard talking about fatal flaws and whether or not he believes fatal flaws exist. And then he says that he believes his fatal flaw is a morbid longing for the picturesque at all costs. And I absolutely adored that opening line, but I really feel like that sentence kind of bleeds into the entire story, and you're seeing the way that Richard like makes beautiful pictures and kind of casts a picturesque light over these horrible events. It's a really good book. All of the characters in it are so intriguing and fascinating, and even though they're like the most toxic, dysfunctional group of people ever, you can't help but kind of like them and kind of root for them and like care about what happens to them, even though at certain points in the story I definitely did hate certain of the characters. I also kind of by the end was like sympathetic towards them, and then there's just so many like plot twists and so much that happens. Honestly, like if you enjoy thriller type books, but like it's definitely more of a slow moving thriller, so if you enjoy that, you'll probably like this book. If you enjoy the dark academia vibe, if you enjoy just like the slow but beautiful, gorgeous, picturesque writing. And I kid you not, after I finished reading this book, I was walking around in this like dreamy daze for a good little while, because I just felt like I had been living in this world and it was like hard to escape out of. It was that kind of a book, and I feel like those kind of books are pretty rare when you get that invested, especially as someone who reads as often as I do and like experiences as many different stories as I do on a regular basis. It's like super exciting to have a book that makes you feel that way. So anyways, that is my review of The Secret History. Sorry that I rambled about that for like a year, but yeah. That I'm going to be discussing is With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. This one I had just seen a lot around the internet and I really wanted to read it. It seemed like a fun, cute story, and that's definitely what it was. It was a fun, cute story. For some reason, I guess I wasn't expecting it to be I guess I was expecting something a little bit different from the writing. So when I first started reading it, I was kind of disappointed because it's definitely a YA book. Like, this is definitely a book that's targeted toward teenagers with the writing style, with the way that the character kind of has her voice. She definitely has a distinct voice in the book. I'm just not like, I just wasn't the hugest fan of her voice. I just thought it I hate to say it, but it kind of seemed a little bit like dumbed down for teens in a way. And I feel like you can read YA books that aren't dumbed down at all and have a very rich writing style. This book felt a little bit too, I don't know, dumbed down when it came to the writing. But so at first I was a little disappointed, but then as I kept reading, by the end of it, I actually ended up really liking this book. It's just a really inspirational and super sweet story. Like, so the main character, we have Emily. She's a 17-year-old teen mom who lives in Philadelphia, kind of like in downtown area, I think. And she lives with her grandmother and her daughter, her little 2-year-old daughter. And the story is just kind of like about her finding herself. It's a very classic coming of age story. Like, it's her kind of finding herself, discovering her voice, discovering her dreams, what she wants to do with her future. And she loves cooking, and cooking is her passion. And so we kind of follow her as she comes to terms with the fact that she can follow her dreams and still, be a mom and be responsible and do all these things. So by the end, like by the second half of the book, I was like super rooting for Emily. I absolutely loved reading her story and reading about what she overcame. At first, I like didn't really like her as a character, and the reason why is because she was super whiny. Like, I feel like she was, no, not necessarily, no, not whiny. She was just very, very stubborn to a point where it annoyed me, because she was in this cooking class and she kind of like leaves the class and doesn't go for like a week because her teacher tells her not to experiment with recipes, and she gets mad about that. And so at first I was like, hey, this is just a story about a bratty teenage girl being annoying. But then she came back and she came around and she goes through this character arc, and I actually ended up loving her character. And just loving just the story. It was just a really sweet story. There were a lot of moments in there where I literally found myself tearing up, like, oh my gosh, this is so cute. So overall, I give this book a 3.5. The book that I read in April was Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. My husband and I read Six of Crows together in March, and then we read Crooked Kingdom this month in April. And I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. I feel like Crooked Kingdom was like I don't know, how do I even describe this? It was like a sob fest. Even though I didn't actually cry while I was reading it, because I was reading it out loud the whole time. But I wanted to cry at so many different points because just these characters and just everything that they go through, and like, especially after reading their stories in the first book and getting to know their backstories and just like really experiencing that, and then getting to see them again in Crooked Kingdom and getting to see how they grow and like mature. It's just, I mean, I don't know. I feel like so many people have talked about these books. So many people have discussed them. There have been so many videos put out about them. And we just had the Netflix show that came out. So that has been being discussed all over the place too. And so I think that there's just one thing. Well, okay. I'm going to limit myself to saying one thing about this book. If you haven't read Crooked Kingdom or Six of Crows, this might be kind of a spoiler. I won't make it super spoilery. But my favorite moment, probably out of the whole duology, I think I might have to say my favorite moment was actually not in this book, but this book kind of continues the storyline. So anyway, it was the moment in Six of Crows when Inej is climbing up the incinerator shaft, and she's about to give up and she's about to lose her motivation, and she realizes that she has a purpose, and she realizes that she wants to have a crew and a ship, and she wants to hunt down slavers and bring them to justice and human trafficking trade in this world. And because if you don't know, Inej was human trafficked and sold to a brothel when she was 14, and so that's like her tragic backstory, and every character in this book has a pretty tragic backstory, but Inej's just like gets me, because just everything that she's gone through and just what a strong character she is, and just how she uses her hardships and trials and trauma to push her forward to become a better person. And then just what a strong person she is on her own. Like, even though she has feelings for Kaz, and she and Kaz have this relationship that's honestly just like too perfect for words. Like, I just like the way that Leigh Bardugo constructed the relationship between Kaz and Inej. And like, the funny thing is, like, I love all the couples in Six of Crows, but Kaz and Inej, there's just something about them, like just the way that she was able to like perfectly match all of their trauma and all of their like just how untrusting they are of everybody else, but yet they have this relationship with each other of almost perfect trust. And it's just like, it makes me want to literally just start crying right now. So okay, I'm gonna try and hurry and make this quick. So next I read On Her Knees by Brenda Marie Davies. This is a memoir about a woman who was negatively affected by toxic purity culture and evangelical religion, and who kind of comes through this whole journey in her life about look, I'm coordinated with the book cover. Wow, my camera will not focus. Anyways, I'm sorry, but I love this book cover so much. Like, I just stare at it sometimes because of how just pretty and aesthetic it is. Like, I just love the color scheme. I love this gold with this pop of green on her dress and just like the font, everything. I'm obsessed. Anyway, this book was so good. I rated it 4.5 stars because I love Brenda's writing style. I love the way she writes. I love how honest and raw and open she is. This book was so hard to read. Like, if you've had any kind of religious trauma, major trigger warning for this. Any kind of sexual assault or like sexual, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, if you have been traumatized at all by purity culture, if you've been told that, you know, your sexuality is like somehow inherently bad or wrong or whatever, if you have any kind of trauma around that, I would be really cautious going into this book because it's definitely dealing with those topics quite a bit, and it deals with a lot of really hard, sad topics, and just breaks my heart to think of what Brenda has gone through, like, so much, because she's such a strong, amazing woman. I talked about this book in my April TBR video, but if you didn't see that, Brenda does have a YouTube channel called God is Gray, where she discusses a lot of social issues through the lens of progressive Christianity. And I just really enjoy her thoughts because I do resonate with a lot of what she says, even though I don't agree 100% with all of her like views on religion and stuff like that. I do resonate with like a lot of what she says, and I think she's an amazing, kind, beautiful person who just radiates love to the world. So it's just really sad to like read about everything that she went through. Like, that really broke my heart and just made me really sad. But overall, though, this book was really good, really well written, really heartbreaking, but super important, the things that she talks about in here. So give it a read if you're interested. Okay, and then book, I have not been keeping track of the amount of books, but right, I don't know. Anyways, was The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin. This book, wow. I just like, there's a lot to say about this book. I could talk about this book for a very long time, and as I'm sure you could probably tell, but this book destroyed me, actually. So I started it out, right? So okay, there's the basic premise of this book. We have 4 different siblings. We have Varya, Daniel, Clara, and Simon. And when they're kids, they go to this fortune teller lady in New York City who claims to be able to tell you the date that you will die, and she tells each of them, when they're children, the date that they will die. And then throughout the book, you get each one of the siblings' perspectives going through their lives and figuring out how this predicted death date ends up affecting their destiny. And at first, I really did not like this book, I will admit. I started out and I was just like, this is so depressing, and for what? Like, it was so sad, but I didn't see a reason for the sadness. Like, I like a good sad book, but when it's sad and I don't understand why it's sad, like, because, okay, so I don't want to like give a spoiler, but the beginning of the book, we start with the youngest, Simon, and he ends up, I don't know if I should say. Anyways, I'll just say what happens to Simon is really sad. He ends up having a sad fate. But you could argue that his fate is kind of his own fault. He kind of brings it on himself by being a little bit of an idiot. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, and that's not to say I don't have any compassion for Simon, because I definitely do. I'm like, I don't really get it. And he behaved in a way that was very selfish and dumb, and you could argue that that was part of the reason why what happened to him happened. And so at first I was kind of like, ugh, like, he gets this depressing prediction when he's a 7-year-old kid, and then, anyway. And then we move on to Clara, who is the next oldest sibling, and she also ends up suffering a very sad fate. But her storyline was like oh my gosh. Because I first started reading it and I was like, I wasn't really loving the books. I didn't really like Simon's section, but then when I started to Claire's section, I was like, oh my gosh. Like my heart felt like it was being ripped slowly and progressively out of my chest, because just everything that she went through and just the way that, oh, I don't want to spoil anything. That's the problem. But the thing is, this book though, like this freaking book, like there were just so many moments in there where I just wanted to cry. And then at the very freaking end of the book, there was so much stuff that happened like right at the very end, and I was thinking it was gonna get boring at the end, and at first I was kind of bored, but then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm bawling my eyes out. And there's like one particular scene towards the end of the book that I will never be able to like get out of my head because it made me cry so much. And like just thinking about okay, I'm sorry, this book was extremely sad if you haven't already caught that. I cried a lot, and oh, I don't know. But at the same time, though, it was such a masterpiece of the way that the story was told. And even though it made me pissed off because a lot of the bad and sad stuff that happened was a direct result of the people being dumb, it's also a direct result of other things as well. So it was like this weird mix of like choice and destiny and fate. And so you're kind of left to work out for yourself what was the real cause of their death or whatever. Anyway, so I ended up giving the Immortalists 3.5 stars. I thought it was really well written. I thought it was really well done. It was sad. But the more I thought about it after I finished it, the more I ended up liking it, and the more I ended up just not able to stop thinking about certain aspects of the story because they were just so raw and just heartfelt and just, oh man. This book was good, actually. It was. Like, I hated it at points, but it was good. So that's what I have to say about this. Okay, so the last 4 books that I read in April, they weren't the last, like I read these sprinkled throughout. I'm not actually doing this in order chronologically of how I read them, but I wanted to talk about all of the Cassandra Clare books last because I read a lot of Cassandra Clare books this month. I am low-key addicted to her books now and I can't stop, so just wanted to let you know. I read City of Ashes in April, like at the very beginning of the month. That's book number 2 in the Mortal Instruments. I ended up giving City of Ashes 3 stars. It's definitely the lowest rating that I've given to any of the books that I've read so far in the series. I just didn't really like City of Ashes that much. I didn't really vibe with it that much. I'm glad I stuck with it, but during the second book I was just kind of like, are all the books going to be like this? Because a really large portion of the plot is centered around a very angsty love triangle, which I wasn't super obsessed with. I was kind of like, I mean, it was fine. I didn't hate it, but it was just kind of like bored with it, just bored with how angsty they all were. And then the like climactic part of the book, like the scene where they like defeat the villain and everything, fell super flat for me because, okay, you have your main villain Valentine, right? He just, for whatever reason, in the second book, I was just not at all impressed by him. I was like, oh, he's so just, I don't know, corny. Like, I don't know, I just felt like he was really corny and I wasn't really connecting with him as a villain, I guess. And then just the way that they ended up defeating him in the second book, I was just like, I don't know, I felt like it was just a little bit anticlimactic. So yeah, the second book wasn't my favorite. Not to say that I hated it or didn't enjoy it at all. There was definitely like fun moments and aspects of it, but it definitely wasn't my favorite. But then I read City of Glass, and I didn't read City of Glass until much later on into the month because I was reading other books. But when I did, let me tell you, I was back. I was hooked. I was there again. I rated City of Glass 4.5 stars, which is the highest rating I've given so far. It was so good. I just loved it. I loved that it was set in Idris most of the time. Idris is like the fictional Shadowhunter country that the Shadowhunters, like, they kind of like their home base. And I just loved that it was all set in that country because it was like a new setting and we were learning about like Shadowhunter culture, and then you learn like all this new information and all this new stuff happens in this book. And just like the end scene, oh, it gave me everything that I wanted. It gave me the drama, it gave me the suspense. It just was so good. I loved it. I loved just all the twists and turns. It was just, and then for whatever reason in this book, my love for all of the characters went up astronomically. Because like in the first 2 books I was like, yeah, these characters are okay, and then in the third book I was like, I love all of these characters with all of my heart. Like they just went through so much character development and then just experienced so much, and it was like, and then just like the romances and just all of it, I loved it. Okay, it was such a good book. It was so ultimately satisfying. Like, I love the plot structure that Cassandra Clare kind of like follows in her books. Like, I find it so fun because it's like throughout the whole book, there's like all these fun little scenes and all these like scenes where they're discovering things, and then at the end you get that just like punch of a climactic scene, and there's always things that happen in it that you're just like, what? Like, I don't know, I just feel like there was always like, I was a little disappointed with it in City of Ashes, but in City of Glass it was like so good. So yes, that was the next book that I read. And then I read promptly afterwards, I read Clockwork Angel, which is the first book in the Infernal Devices series, because I had finished the first 3 in the Mortal Instruments, so I decided to hop over to that series, plus my super long hold on my library came off. So I read that book, and I gave that one a 4.5 as well, I believe. Yeah, I gave that one a 4.5 as well. It was so fun. I loved it. The only thing that bothers me about the Infernal Devices so far is the writing style just bugs me just a little bit, because I feel like she's really good at writing like in the modern time period, but when she tries to write in the old time period, I feel like she tries a little bit too hard to make it sound like she's actually writing in that time period, and she's not as good at it as she is with the other time period. So I feel like at certain points I'm just like, what? Like at certain points there's just I don't know how to explain. It's not as convincing as I would like it to be. But other than that, though, it was a really good story. I really like the characters in this one. I especially like Jem. I think he's adorable, and Jem and Will just have a really really fun dynamic. I really like both of them together. They're just a lot of fun to read. And Tessa, I feel like Tessa is she's about what I expected. You know, she's a YA, female YA protagonist, so you know she's gonna be what she's gonna be. And then the last book that I read was City of Fallen Angels. I actually have it right here, got it from my library. I absolutely hate the cover, it's so ugly. But I finished that one like right at the end of the month. I was trying to wait until May so that it wouldn't be on this wrap up, but I ended up finishing it on April 29th, so I finished it like right before the end of the month. I also gave that one a 4.5 stars. I thought it was so good as well, just like all the twists and turns, everything that happens, the character development, the relationships, like even the relationship with Clary and Jace. Like I feel like the conflict the inherent conflict in the story was also kind of the same as the conflict in their relationship, and I really really liked that. I thought that was a good, like I just thought it was very well done. It didn't feel like far-fetched. It didn't feel like, oh my gosh, she's trying to revive this dead plot. You know, it didn't feel like that at all. It felt like a fresh new plot. It felt, I don't know, I just really really liked it. So I'm excited to read the rest of the books. I'm really hooked. I think I already said that. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Again, this video is really long. I'm going to try to edit it down so it's not insane. But please give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you feel like it. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.